Hello again. So I think it's a great time for us to begin. The numbers are still rising, which is fantastic, but nonetheless, we have a lot to share and a lot to discuss today. So without further ado, I think it's a great time to begin this webinar. My name is Joe Appiah. I am the coordinator of the Marine Coastal and Island Biodiversity work at the CBD Secretariat. So thank you, one and all. Welcome, one and all, to this webinar to announce the launching of a new report celebrating the over a decade of the efforts under the CBD to describe ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. We're so glad that you could all join us for the launch of this report. This is just about the 10-year anniversary of the first EBSO workshop in 2011. And the report that we've put together synthesizes a decade of progress, achievements, and lessons learned through the EBSA process, and brings together just some of the EBSA stories from across the broad global EBSA community. But before we hear these stories, let's watch this beautiful video produced by the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative to get us started on our dive, so to speak, into the EBSA world. So if you bear with me just a moment, I will upload this video.
and human activities in the ocean. Ultimately, this can help sustain livelihoods, maintain food security, and protect the well-being of communities.
Well, I hope that puts us in the right mindset to remind ourselves what we're all doing this for the important and essential ecosystems and biodiversity of the ocean, the services they provide, not only for the planet, but for human well-being and sustainable development. But now it's time for us to turn to our opening statements to kick off our webinar and set us in the right direction. And it's my privilege now to give the floor to Ms. Elizabeth Maruma, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Elizabeth Maruma was previously the Director of the Law Division and has worked with UNEP for over 2 decades. Prior to joining the Law Division, she was the Deputy Director of the Ecosystems Division. But currently, as the Executive Secretary, she coordinates all of the work under the Convention and the Secretariat, including the process underway to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So please, the floor is yours, Madam Executive Secretary.
Thank you very much, Joe. Hope you can hear me. Confirm.
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Thank you very much. And I see Mr. Okuda is with us. Welcome, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for joining us for the launch of this publication that celebrates a momentous achievement of the process under the CBD, or Convention on Biological Diversity, to facilitate the description of ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. After more than a decade, the EPSA, or Ecologically or Biodiversity Significant Marine Areas process, has built a broad global EPSA community, and that has been one of the most noteworthy achievements of the work under the convention. I sincerely thank the government of Japan through the Japan Biodiversity Fund for supporting the production of this report going to be launched today, and for its long-standing support for the EPSA process, without which these achievements would not have been possible. So sincere thanks. My sincere thanks also goes to Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative for working with us to produce this report and for its valuable contribution to the EPSA process. EPSA journey has been highly collaborative, engaging more than 500 experts from over 140 countries, and has gained a widespread global recognition. This science and data-rich process has coalesced a wealth of knowledge, providing an important tool to support governments and competent authorities in identifying where to focus their efforts to conserve and sustainably use marine biodiversity. The report to be launched was commissioned to take stock of the tremendous progress that EPSA has made through its process on this 10th year anniversary of since the first EPSA workshop, as Joe had mentioned earlier on. Rarely have we had the opportunity to hear stories behind these EPSAs from those who know best. It is a valuable time to take stock of these lessons, as the convention parties are currently developing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will be submitted for adoption at the second part of the Conference of the Parties later next year. As many of you know, the EPSA process began based on a decision of the CBD Conference of the Parties way back 10 years ago, 2010. At the same meeting, the convention parties adopted the Ig Biodiversity Targets and saw the EPSA process as an important tool for helping to achieve these targets. Similarly, EPSAs will play an important role in supporting the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when it is adopted. In addition to the framework, The Conference of the Parties 15 will also be an opportunity, or will take an important decision on the future of the EPSAS process, which has been a long unresolved issue. I urge the convention parties to really take time and read this report to remember why we began the EPSA process so long ago, and to see the achievements made to date through the number of case studies and stories which will come out in the report, and be able to recall the importance of ensuring that the process can evolve into the future. EPSAs are more than just shapes on the map. They are a reflection of the living, breathing ecosystems that abound into the oceans and seas, and ecosystems that are facing increasing threats and pressures. We must take action to protect and better manage these areas. And I think we've seen the beautiful video, how the creatures, the many creatures are in our oceans. And we hope that for them to be able to stay ecologically and biologically significant. So we need to continue to provide services that we all depend on. Finally, I wish to thank those of you that have contributed to the EPSAS process to where it is today, in some way, for being an important part of the history of EPSAS. And I welcome you all to be also part of the future of EPSAS as we move forward to the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when it is adopted. Welcome you all to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Executive Secretary, for those inspiring words and for reminding us of the importance of the EPSA work in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the work of the parties in that regard. So we hope that that you can stay on also with us in this webinar if possible as well. With that, we'll now turn to Mr. Naohisa Okuda, the Director General of the Nature Conservation Bureau in the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. In this role, Mr. Okuda oversees the biodiversity policy of Japan. He supported the COP presidency at CBD COP10 in 2010, in which the Ig Biodiversity Targets were adopted. Following COP10, he was appointed as the director of the Japan Biodiversity Fund, which has been a major source of support to the EPSA process, as well as many other areas of work under the CBD. Mr. Okuda was appointed to his current role in July this year, where he has led the process toward the pledge of the government of Japan to establish the second phase of the Japan Biodiversity Fund. So we're very, very honored and pleased to have Mr. Okuda here, and please, the floor is yours, Mr. Okuda.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Apoit, for the introduction, and good morning and good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address to all of you. And especially I should thank the Executive Secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Mulema. And I hope we can continue our collaboration with the CBD Secretary. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the launch of the report, Special Places in the Ocean, a decade of identifying ecologically or biologically significant marine areas of EBSAs. The COP decision on EBSAs was adopted at CBD COP9. The identification of EBSAs started since then. Furthermore, Ig Target 11 was agreed at COP10, held under the presidency of Japan. The target includes the conservation of at least 10% of coastal and marine areas through protected areas and other effective areas based conservation measures by 2020. For this reason, the EBSAs came to be expected as a significant scientific basis for establishing marine protected areas. I'm very pleased to see the progress made in the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity through the description of numerous episodes around the world. Japan has been supporting the EBSOS process through the Japan Biodiversity Fund, known as JBF, such as the support for the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, launched in 2011. JBF has been focusing on supporting capacity building efforts by developing countries' parties with the following three main objectives. First, to enable experts from developing country parties to participate in the regional workshops to identify and describe these areas. Second, to enable them to contribute their data and knowledge to the EBSA process. And third, to enhance their own capacity to identify and use EBSAs for planning and management. I'm proud that JBF has been supporting the EBSA process so far. Japan follows the global process and identified our own EBSAs around our country from 2011 to 2013. We then designated for new marine protected areas, which we call offshore seabed nature conservation areas, and achieved that percentage of Aichi Target 11 in 2020. This outcome is owing thanks to the Professor Shirayama-san, who is the one of the panelists today. And I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Shirayama. And I believe this is a good example of the EBSA process being used as a scientific basis for the designation of MPAs. More than 10 years have passed since the start of the EBSA process. During this time, the marine environment has changed. The impact of climate change on marine ecosystems has been particularly significant. It may be necessary to update the information in the existing EBSAs, and the ongoing discussion on options for modifying descriptions of EBSAs in Substa 24 is relevant. I look forward to the completion of the discussion, hopefully with particularly useful options. In 2022, the second part of COP15 will be held, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will be adapted. I hope that the EBSA's process will be further developed towards achieving its ambitious target and realizing the 2050 vision for biodiversity, living in harmony with nature. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Okuda, for joining us, for giving us those inspiring words, and indeed to you and to all of our colleagues at the JBF for the generous support that you provide to our work in the EBSA process, and also to the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, as you've mentioned. I'm also pleased to say that we have a similar publication underway for the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, and we look forward to launching that publication as well later this year. So thank you very much. So now I will give a few words on the background and the context of the work on EBSAs. So I believe you should be able to see my slides now. I hope colleagues can see my slides. It seems to be paused. Apologies. Screen. Okay, so going to give just a bit of background and context for the work on EBSAs and ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. So as we all know, the work on EBSAs emerged under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is a global convention with the three main goals of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. Now, under the CBD, parties have obligations to conserve and sustainably use the marine environment, and also with respect to a number of global goals and targets that have been set into the context of the convention. So across the wide expanse and diverse ecosystems of the ocean, a huge question is, where do we focus our attention and our efforts for research and planning and management with respect to marine biodiversity? And this is what led to the adoption of the CBD EBSA criteria in 2008. So at the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2008, the COP adopted these 7 scientific criteria that are relatively general and flexible criteria to be applied to identify and describe ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. So this was really the basis for the EBSA process. 2 years later, in 2010, the Conference of the Parties adopted the Ig Biodiversity Targets. Now, these are a set of time-bound targets that address different aspects of conservation and sustainable use, and had a 10-year deadline of 2020. And what this did is actually increased the ambition and the urgency to better understand, to conserve and sustainably use the special places of the ocean, which meant that we had to know where the special places of the ocean were. So at the same meeting, the Conference of the Parties mandated the Secretariat, the CBD Secretariat, to facilitate the description of EBSAs through regional workshops. So there in the map, you see the scopes of all 15 regional EBSA workshops that have been held. And those are workshops that have brought together the governments and experts from the regions, as well as relevant organizations and data providers, to synthesize information and propose areas that meet the EBSA criteria. Now, the outputs of those workshops are submitted to the CBD subsidiary body and to the Conference of the Parties. And if the Conference of the Parties basically accepts those areas, they become official CBD EBSAs. At the moment, we have 321 EBSAs, with a further 17 awaiting consideration by COP15. You can see various other facts and figures there, which are addressed in more detail in the report, but it also shows there the wide diversity and the wide breadth of different types of areas that are described as meeting the EBSA criteria, as well as the scope and coverage of the EBSAs across the global marine ecosystem. So truly a global effort that has really been highly collaborative and highly integrative of so many different types of sources of knowledge and data. What's important to remember is that EBSAs only focus on the scientific information about ecological and biological features. They don't prescribe management measures, and they don't say what activities should or should not take place. So although they're shapes on a map, they're not protected areas, they're not fish enclosures, they don't address jurisdictional matters, but what they are is a valuable source of knowledge to inform interventions and actions by governments and competent intergovernmental organizations to take action for research, planning, and management, whatever is appropriate for the features that are described in those EBSAs. So after more than 10 years, it's time to take stock of progress, achievements, and lessons learned. This is why we're pleased to make this new report available. You see the link there, and the link will also be disseminated to all of the attendees of this report. This webinar. So we're also, throughout the rest of this webinar, going to hear an overview of the new report, perspectives from the CBD EBSA technical teams, EBSA stories from around the world, perspectives from some of our CBD party delegates, as well as some words on the legacy of the EBSA work and the future outlook. So before I turn to the next speaker, I just want to also have a few words about the platform here itself. So we have a lot of attendees. We're very grateful to have that, but because of that, we have to limit the interactive ability of this webinar. So unfortunately, attendees won't be able to unmute themselves and speak, but nonetheless, we encourage you to provide questions in the question section. So other attendees may not see your questions, but nonetheless, we will. And when we come to what we hope to have a question and answer session, we can have that as part of the discussion. But let's move on now to our colleague, Mr. David Johnson, the coordinator of the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative, to give us an overview of this publication. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thanks to Madam Executive Secretary and Director General Akudu. I hope you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, but your slides are not up yet.
Right.
David, I'm happy to share if you're having trouble.
Yes, please. Sorry, as usual, technology outfoxes me.
Okay. Hold on one second.
Thank you very much, Joe. As Joe said, I am the coordinator of the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative and lead author of this report. And GOBI is a partnership of scientific organizations
David? Well, unless David has fallen asleep, he seems to have lost a connection there. Okay, there he is now. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So a celebration of the wonders of marine life, from the very small, like this pygmy seahorse, next slide, to the very large, from discrete wonders, next slide, to the extensive and productive systems, next slide. A celebration of over a decade of effort by hundreds of people all over the world. Next slide, please. Coming together, gathering and sharing knowledge, recognizing hitherto untapped information and data. A celebration of investment over time by generous donors and host countries. Next slide, please. This has been achieved, as Joe has just explained, by implementation of an accepted methodology to describe the most ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, with the help of experienced technical support, ensuring consistency. Next slide, please. The big question or challenge in a vast ocean is, where should we focus and prioritize future conservation or management efforts, as Joe posed in his presentation. So areas have been described whose marine biodiversity, uniqueness and richness merits better scientific understanding, greater awareness, and if appropriate, protection from adverse impacts. The report charts this progress. Next slide. In this report, we've also collated personal stories from a selection of experts, reflecting their individual take on each of the regional EBSA workshops, some of whom you will hear from shortly. For me, it's been a personal journey of regional collaboration, an introduction to many talented people, different places, and different species and ecosystems. Next slide, please. The feel-good factor is magnified when EBSA information is acknowledged and used. For example, last week in Paris, I participated in a technical workshop building on information captured in Northwest Mediterranean EBSAs, strengthened by IUCN's Marine Mammal Task Force efforts to identify important marine mammal areas and critical cetacean habitat identified by ACOBAMS, the Agreement on the Conservation of Cetaceans of the Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and contiguous Atlantic area. For this region, there is political momentum. with commitments from France, Monaco, Italy, and Spain to address the threat of ship strikes to fin and sperm whales. This is something to be taken forward at the International Maritime Organization, and my colleague Giuseppe Notarbartolo di Schiari writes about this area in the impact report. Next slide, please. We're at the eve of the climate COP26 in Glasgow. The Arctic EBSA workshop, co-chaired by Jake Rice, affectionately known as the godfather of EBSAs, raised awareness and recognized that an additional degree of precaution is needed for threats to Arctic sea ice features. The sea ice systems of the Arctic are highly dynamic and changing fast. Indigenous peoples have lived in the Arctic for millennia, and their knowledge of the Arctic and its biodiversity is deeply integrated with their culture and livelihoods. The Arctic Council continues to address issues faced by the Arctic governments and indigenous Arctic peoples. Arctic EBSAs contribute to their considerations. Next slide, please. As you will hear, EBSAs can help focus efforts for marine spatial planning, restoration efforts, species recovery, and potential protected areas. The FAO has been an important partner in the EBSA process, and the CBD's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will provide an impetus to recognise other effective conservation measures, such as the FAO's vulnerable marine ecosystems, and nature's multiple contributions to people, including food security and genetic resources. EBSAs can often contribute to other processes, as in this case from the Eastern Temperate and Tropical Pacific. Next slide, please. EBSAs are also part of the picture for the forthcoming UN Decades for Science and Restoration, the Sustainable Development Goals and challenges highlighted by IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Next slide, please. The CBD deserves great credit for convening 15 regional EBSA workshops, for gathering together diverse data resources, and for building capacity around the world. But no process is perfect. Parties at COP15 in Kunming will consider how to keep EBSA information up to date, how to add to this important resource, how to incorporate any missing elements, and how best to acknowledge national EBSA-like exercises. This EBSA impact study recognises a successful first chapter, a direction of travel, and a baseline of special places, all of which has benefited from the support of governments and individuals. I'll stop here and let other speakers add their rich contributions to give you more details. Thank you very much, and thank you, Joe, for showing my slides.
Thank you, David. Thank you for those inspiring words. Also, providing a fantastic overview of the report, as well as an overview of, in fact, the whole process itself. So we really appreciate your contribution, your coordination of inputs to the report, and indeed all the contributions that the Gobi partnership has provided to the EBSA process over the many years. Thank you. So with that, we can now turn to our colleagues, Pat Halpin of the Duke University Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab and Piers Dunstan of CSIRO Australia to give us their perspectives on the decade under the EBSA process. So Pat and Piers coordinated the work of the data support teams for all of the EBSA workshops, providing the technical support that was absolutely essential for the success of the process. So please, I believe Pat will go first. Take it away, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. It's hard to believe that 10 years has gone by. We've been involved with this work for more than 10 years. Prior to the first workshop, organizing and working with the CBD Secretariat on the methods and process. This is going to be a joint presentation from my lab at Duke University, but also Piers Dunstan from CSIRO from Australia. We led the 2 technical teams that helped support the 15 EBSAs to date, EBSA workshops to date. So there were 15 workshops held over 10 years. Our lab group worked on 9 of these workshops. Cyro worked on the remainder. The technical teams, our main role was to organize data prior to the workshops and bring that data to the workshops, provide analysis and synthesis during the workshops, provide technical facilitation, prepare the maps, and also the report preparation. But it really was the regional experts who it was their role, it was their energy on actually getting together and describing the EBSAs. And so our role was to facilitate, to stand in the background, try to bring the data together, try to organize things. And it was a wonderful experience and very unique experience. Each workshop, I think, was unique in terms of the available experts, the available data, the focus of the workshops, and many of them were many lessons learned. So it's very, very good time to reflect back on this process and lessons learned for moving forward into the future. A couple of things, we only have a few minutes here, but a few highlights. One thing I see all the time is that people who are not totally familiar with the process look at a global map, and what pops out at them are the extremely large EBSAs, because that's what you can see at a global scale. And what we want to note is that actually the largest number of EBSAs were described in national jurisdiction waters and close to shore. And so many of them, while EBSAs do not designate any type of management, many of them did already overlap with managed areas. And so that's something that often I think is overlooked. Another big piece is that the big, large EBSAs that are often in areas beyond national jurisdiction were mainly focused on large oceanographic features or large benthic features, chains of seamounts and things, but also were described often by work that was conducted prior to the workshops on identifying important bird areas or marine mammal areas or other kinds of pre-processing work. And that was very important on especially describing these large areas beyond national jurisdiction. I want to touch for 1 minute on gaps and needs for the future. I think now that we're in 10 years in, it's good to reflect on this. And one thing, when you're looking at the map of total EBSAs from these workshop reports, we need to remember that there are areas that were not included due to national processes. And so we need to jointly think about what are the other places in those regions that have been identified or might be in process within national processes. We also need to consider where are the areas where there was not expertise or was not data, and these might be future gaps to be filled. And so for me, this is a very optimistic and exciting time to think about how do we revisit and update these sites with new information as it becomes available. So these areas I feel are going to be ripe for new work into the future. Another thing that came up during the EBSA process was to think about different types and classes of EBSAs. And this is not to confuse things. It was really to try to clarify more precisely that some of the EBSAs were defining individual features, like an individual seamount or an individual coral reef. Others were trying to look at groups of features, so a chain of seamounts, for example. While some of them, as noted in the video, may be ephemeral features, features that only exist for part of the year or a season. And then finally, some of them might be totally dynamic and mobile areas. So you can have features like the gyre, the Sargasso Sea, or the Costa Rica Thermal Dome, or the Pacific Transition Zone, large oceanographic features that might be truly dynamic. And the one reason we felt it's important to think about these kind of classifications is just to add more precision and a better interpretation of the boundaries. What do those boundaries mean? Because some of the boundaries might be more strict and some of them might be more for interpretation as fuzzy boundaries that shift over time. The last point I want to make is that the EBSA workshops to date dealt with site level criteria site by site. So each site was considered by the experts on its own merits. And into the future, we're going to need to start thinking about what is the whole package. What is the package with what we call network criteria, thinking about how representative, how connected, how replicated, how adequate are the sites for our needs. So just to recap, I feel that each workshop was unique and was really characterized by the experts' available data and preparation. Areas that were analyzed prior to the workshops actually were easier to define. So small managed areas already in coastal areas, large oceanographic features in the larger areas. I feel it was important to clearly define the distinctions of different types of EBSAs. And then also there's this great need in the future to look at moving from just site level analyses to more network level analyses. Now I'm going to turn it over to Piers Dunstan from the second technical team from Australia.
Thanks, Pat. Joe, just confirming that you can hear me?
Indeed,
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah, good. Sorry, everyone. I've been having a few problems with my computer, and hence I don't have my video, my webcam working. So I thought, following on from Pat's presentation, I'd just sort of give a bit of a perspective about where we've come from and where we're going. And it was about 10 years ago that we worked for the very first EBSA workshop in the Southwest Pacific in 2011. And it's worthwhile looking at where we were then and looking about where we have got to at this point in time. And it was very interesting to hear some of the discussion earlier about the use of EBSA in Japan as well. So what has changed? Well, obviously we started in 2011 with no places described as EBSA. And since then we have described an enormous number of places over a very vast amount of the ocean. The next slide, Joe. So the regional workshops were the basis of the whole EBSA process. And they really have been a synthesis of the best available scientific and expert knowledge that have come together to describe each of the EBSA areas. And it's been really important, these workshops, because they have built a shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve and a shared appreciation of actually the outcomes and the outputs that we have achieved. And they have been a very big international effort over a very large number of people. So I think that one of the best things that has actually come out of the whole EBSA process has been just the collaboration that has emerged out of those EBSA workshops, the collaboration in the workshops, but also the collaboration afterwards as well. So there's been very strong links that have been forged as a result of the work of each of these EBSA workshops. Next slide, Joe. So what have we learned? Well, we know that we've collated a vast amount of information about marine ecosystems worldwide, covering at least 74% of the world's oceans. And these descriptions have significantly advanced our understanding of many of the ecosystems that have been poorly described. Pat pointed out some of those places earlier where we have got very little information, but we've still got EBSAs described in those locations. We might not have all of them described, but based on the information that we had at that point in time, we've actually advanced the state of scientific knowledge in quite a significant way for large parts of the world's oceans, in particular places outside of national jurisdiction. So it's been a really important advance scientifically, and it has really promoted the understanding of how important those places are in the high seas and even in national jurisdiction. Next slide, Joe. So where have we gone since then? Well, now we're starting to actually see EBSAs being used inside marine spatial planning frameworks. We've worked in a significant number of countries talking about how EBSA and EBSA criteria have been used or could be used as part of their marine spatial planning processes. And what has become really apparent through each of these processes is that countries are all struggling with exactly the same issues. The issue that they're all struggling to deal with, that everyone is struggling to deal with, is how do we maintain our environment while building our economies and our livelihoods? And that's a really fundamental question to the use of the oceans worldwide. And EBSA are actually emerging as one of the most important tools that we can use as part of that process. Final slide, Joe. Thanks. And just as a final point, filling in one of those gaps that Pat talked about, we're working with Parks Australia to identify what Parks Australia is calling the key natural values in Australian marine parks. The key natural values in Australian marine parks are based directly on the EBSA criteria, so they're directly compatible with EBSA outside. And these key natural values are one of the key pieces of information that we're using to start to develop monitoring prioritization questions and start to understand how effective Australian marine parks are at conserving and protecting marine biodiversity. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Pat and Pierce. A very valuable overview and extremely valuable perspectives. The work of the data teams has been essential not only to supporting the actual workshops themselves, but to helping to evolve the methodologies and develop and further develop the methodologies that we've applied and evolved throughout the process of the EBSA workshop. So really, thank you so much for your contribution and efforts throughout this process. So, as Madam Executive Secretary of the CBD said, EBSAs are more than just shapes on a map. They're reflections of the living, breathing ecosystems of the oceans and seas. They exist at so many different scales and in all parts of the ocean, and so there are multitudes of EBSA stories around the world, some of which are captured in the report, and some of which we have the pleasure to hear today. So now we'll turn to some of these stories, and our first story will come from Mr. David Freestone, the Executive Secretary of the Sargasso Sea Commission. So David, now the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. I think that in view of the experience of my colleagues, I'm going to ask you to show slides for me, if that's all right. You should have those, is that right?
Yes, we should. Believe our colleague should be showing now.
That you had them. I noticed that David Johnson had some problems with his. I could give it a try if you like. Here we are. All right. Okay. Look, I'm in. Can you see this?
Yes. Well, this is our colleague. This is one of our colleagues' screen actually. So if you just give us the signal when to change.
Well, actually, I can do it now. If you can see mine, all right?
No, no. We're not viewing your screen. You have to give us a signal when it's the time.
All right. Then I need to get out of this myself.
No. So
all right. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just sorry to keep. Okay. So all right. So that's excellent. Okay. So again, my thanks to you all for inviting us to speak this morning. And as we already heard from colleagues, this has been an interesting process. And for us, the Sargasso Sea description was actually one of the earliest, if you really like to think, successes, and I'm sure others see it that way, of the Sargasso Sea project, which was launched in 2020. I think it was at the first time that we started to give an announcement of this initiative for the conservation of this huge high seas ecosystem at the UN that your predecessor, Jun Lee, actually suggested that it would be an ideal site for consideration for describing as an EBSA. So next slide, please. So the Sargasso first question is, where is it? And as Pat Halpin already indicates, this is a huge, largely high seas ecosystem in the North Atlantic subtropical gyre around the islands of Bermuda, 2 million square miles, more than 4 million square kilometers. And it was as a result of the initiative of and the work that's been done by the Sargasso Sea Alliance, as it was then before the Commission was established in 2014, that this was put forward by Bermuda, a workshop in Recife, Brazil, in 2012. At that point, it is a mixed area in that it includes also the EZ of Bermuda, but the overwhelming part of it is in the area of the high seas. It was then sent to SBSTA for a review and then was approved. The description was then added to the list of EBSAs in at the Hyderabad COP11 in October of that year. Now, in the meantime, there's also another process, which was the next slide, please, which was also to describe a part of that in the northwest corner, actually, of that large ecosystem, which is the New England and Corner sea mounts. And I remember that the participants of that in that workshop on the Northwest Atlantic actually called us and made sure checked, if you like, the Sargasso Sea Initiative was interested in supporting this separate initiative for another episode just on the seamounts, which we were delighted to support. And that's so we now actually we're double EBSTers in part of the system, because those seamounts are particularly important. There was recently just a cruise from the NOAA vessel, the Okeanos, over those seamounts areas, doing wonderful pictures from more than 4,000 meters, which are up on, there's a link on that on the NOAA website and also on our website. Next, please. So why is the Sargasso Sea an EBSA? So the criteria which it meets, I thought this is the best way to approach this. Uniqueness and rarity. It is home to a lot of, it's basically an ecosystem which is based on what's called a holopelagic floating algae, drift algae, which is the sargassum. Two main species, fluitans and natans, and they are the home to a large number of indigenous species, but some endemics as well. And also because they represent a sort of floating mass in the open ocean, they're also very important for the life cycles of other species as well. And I should just say that although sargassum has had a bad rap in the Caribbean, where large amounts of it have been washing up on the beaches, this is actually a result of we think this is a anthropogenic change which has been brought about by changes in the in currents and particularly changes in temperature and by human pollution. So that's a different source. So we're talking really just about the high seas system. Next, please. It's high criteria as well, special importance of the life history stages of species. So they act as nursery habitats, as I said, like floating systems, which creatures can attach themselves to. We see that picture of a sea turtle. The famous lost years, after they've got off the beaches into the ocean, they actually then spend some time in the open ocean, and the sargassum in the Atlantic provides a sheltering habitat, which they actually can also, where the temperature is slightly warmer, and they actually grow there for some years as well. So it's quite an important part of their life cycle. The Sargasso Sea is also the only known spawning location for the anguillid eels, the American and the European eel, Anguilla anguilla and Anguilla rostrata. It's the only known pupping location for poor beagle sharks. So those are all species which are on the IUCN Red List, as well as an important migratory route for lots of cetaceans and a lot of commercial species like marlin and tunas, as well as birds. Next. So that I already touched on this, the importance for threatened, endangered, and declining species. The anguillid eels, both species which I mentioned are already red list endangered, the European eel critically endangered, the blue marlin, which is threatened, and all the turtles which are endangered, as well as a number of interesting species like the Bermuda petrel, the cahao. Next. It's also high on the criteria for vulnerability, fragility, sensitivity, and slow recovery, particularly, of course, because we already heard about the New England and Corner sea rise mounts, which were damaged by bottom trawling in the 50s and are taking some time to recover. But we've also seen that from the Okeanos cruises last month that there is actually a lot of amazing species still there. Next, please. Yes, and that's the area which we mentioned. Next. Despite the area which has traditionally been low in fishing, it's amazingly high in biological productivity. very high primary production due to the absorption of carbon and due to photosynthesis, as well as the activities of microbes. So also high criteria for that. Next. Biological diversity, as I've already given some indication of the wealth of biological diversity in this area, which for high seas areas are usually were traditionally regarded as something of like deserts. Well, this is like an ocean, like an island of biodiversity in the middle of a huge North Atlantic system. So diverse species, endemics, and also, of course, supports the lifestyle of others. Next. Here we actually come onto the naturalness, because it is one of the highest, most dense areas for maritime traffic between North America and Europe. There have been some impacts clearly on its naturalness, and these are all human induced. It's also a gyre, so we've seen impacts of plastics, etc. And I already talked a little bit about bottom trawling on the seamounts. So we can't say that it's a high naturalness, because there have been some impacts, but this is something that we hope to identify and take further, do some more work on this. Next, please. And our great success really, as a result of the description at the Hyderabad COP, was that a proposal was then put forward in the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization by the EU, supported by the US, to actually reconsider the way in which NAFO was treating this area in the light of the EPSA designation. And after a number of years of deliberations, because it uncovered a few issues with other activities on these seamounts, it was in 2016 that all the seamounts in the NAFO area were closed to fishing, and midwater trawling was also restricted in a number of important ways. That was 2016, and in 2021 that was extended till 2024. Hopefully we'll see that indefinitely. It's continued indefinitely. So that's the really good news. We've made the two things just to finish, if I may. One is that we've not had quite so much success with the other regulatory bodies in trying to persuade them that they should take action based on the EPSA. That's something that we are continuing to work on, and we've just been granted. We've just been given a grant by the Global Environment Facility, which I think will give us the resources to actually start to do some more work in order to make more persuasive in our work with the regulatory bodies, the other regulatory bodies related to fishing, mining, etc., and the IMO. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Indeed, the Sargasso Sea is a fantastic example of a really unique ecosystem, and one that has also had a number of influence into the various regulatory processes. So it's a great example of an EPSA success story. Now we cross the Atlantic over to South Africa, where our colleague Steve Kirkman from the government of South Africa will give us an overview of some of the EPSA work going on over there. Steve, please go ahead.
Thank you, Joseph. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
In full screen mode?
You just have to hit presenter mode at the bottom. Perfect, yes.
Okay, so I'll be showing you progress that has been made in the Benguela Current region in Southern Africa since the original EPSA processes and descriptions back in 2012 and 2013 in this part of the world. There's a lot of EPSAs in the region, so I'm very much going to be providing you with an overview. The project that has supported taking EPSAs forward in the region since then is the Benguela Current Marine Spatial Management and Governance Project, known as MARISMA, which is implemented by the German GIZ in partnership with the Benguela Current Convention and the Republics of Angola, Namibia, and South Africa. The aim of MARISMA is to support the introduction of ecosystem-based marine spatial planning to help develop sustainable use of the ocean in this region. And it's for this purpose that we have been advancing EPSAs in the region, mainly as a spatial tool to inform the marine spatial planning process from the biodiversity perspective, with the intention that the marine spatial planning will in turn secure the features for which the EPSAs were described. So originally there were 22 EPSAs described during regional meetings in 2012 and 2013 for this region, and adopted at COP in 2014. At the start of the Merisma project, there was more embedded data and information available than had been available during the regional workshops. So we have used these data to review the descriptions of existing EPSAs and to improve their boundaries, and also to identify new EPSAs in the region. By the way, by agreement, we took into account all of South Africa's open ocean space in this, although only part of it is by definition in the Benguela. If you look on the map here, the smaller, darker, highlighted EPSAs were the focus for the revision under the Merisma project. These were EPSAs that were more focused on specific features and occur within national jurisdictions. They are what Patrick earlier referred to mainly as Type 1 and Type 2 EPSAs. And then the much more extensive light blue EPSAs mostly describe wide-scale processes and extend into the high seas or into countries that were not part of this project. And we excluded those from the project, mainly because there was no process for dealing with those EPSAs at the time in terms of modifying them and so on. So we used a systematic conservation planning approach supplemented with expert knowledge to review the EPSA descriptions, to refine the boundaries and identify new EPSAs, taking into account gaps that we identified in the EPSA network through expert input and systematic conservation planning approach. Originally, there were 17 of these EPSAs in Angola, Namibia, and South Africa that were included in the analyses. Of these, one was left unchanged in the project, but the boundaries were refined for 14 of the EPSAs, two EPSAs were each split into two more refined EPSAs, and 10 new EPSAs have been described in the region, taking the numbers from 17 to 29 therefore. And on the map here, the colored polygons are either revised or new EPSAs described in the region, overlaid by the outlines of regional EPSAs. So these modifications and new descriptions were technically reviewed, both nationally and regionally, and also internationally with the assistance of experts from the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative. And then after national political approval, they were submitted to SBSTA by all three countries in 2020 and 2021, and they now await the COP decision on the modalities for new EPSAs and modifications of EPSAs. Apart from the description and delineation of EPSAs, we assess the status of the EPSAs, including the ecological condition, the ecosystem threat status, and the protection levels of each. Also the pressure levels of the current activities taking place in the EPSAs. And these assessments were key for the process of delineating proposed management zones for the EPSAs that would be useful for marine spatial planning, and also for associated guidelines for the management of these EPSA zones. And this is depicted in this image here. The example EPSA here is the Vusulu Kwanza Kabaledu complex EPSA in Angola. In all three countries, the results of the EPSA processes have provided key components of the biodiversity sector inputs into marine spatial planning, which is very much new in all three countries. It's very much under development at this stage. But the next few slides will be looking at impacts and achievements per country. So in Angola, the zoning and management recommendations of the Vusulu Kwanza Kabaledu complex and two other EPSAs were adopted as suggested in the country's first marine area plan and its regulations, with only minor changes to accommodate the interests of other sectors. And also Angola is currently in the process of turning all of the EPSAs, either entirely or partially, into marine protected areas. This process will begin with the designation of its first marine protected area, which will cover the Angolan part of its transboundary Namib EPSA that it shares with Namibia. In Namibia, also EPSA descriptions, zoning and management recommendations have found strong integration into their first marine area plan, which is for the central part of Namibia. Two of the EPSAs here have been integrated as biodiversity conservation zones and biodiversity impact management zones, along with detailed management measures for them in their plan. And then in South Africa, the descriptions of the original EPSAs seen here, mapped here on the top, that were adopted in 2014, provided support for the proposal of 20 new marine areas for protection in that same year. There was a lengthy process to finally declare these EPSAs. 20 of them were declared in 2019, and the lower map here shows the situation of the darker new marine protected areas in relation to the original EPSA boundaries. And the EPSA descriptions and the zoning and management recommendations for the EPSAs have been key inputs into the country's first coastal and marine critical biodiversity areas map shown here on the left. And this map is providing the basis for the biodiversity sector's input into our marine area plans, as seen on the right there. And we'll also provide the basis for identifying further areas for marine protection in future. Okay, final slide. So there's of course been differences in the approach and the impacts in the three different Benguela countries. These have often been related to differences in institutional processes and data availability, and have resulted in different but valid outcomes for securing marine biodiversity in each country. There's obviously not time to go more fully into that, but there's a paper in preparation shown here on this final slide that will nicely distill the process in the region and all the lessons learned from it once it has come out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed for describing this valuable work. This is a great example of how the EPSA process has been further built on to support domestic planning and regional collaboration, and we're really pleased to see how this has developed. So now we go back across the Atlantic through the Panama Canal and onto the Pacific coast of Central America, where our colleague Mr. Jorge Jimenez from the Director General of Marviva will tell us about another interesting EPSA example that has stimulated international collaboration. Please, Jorge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Can you remind me how to share the screen?
We also have your slides if you have trouble, but if you can also turn on your camera as well if possible. But there should be a share screen button at the top of your toolbar. If not, we can share your slides for you.
Okay, yes, I guess, I don't know where it is.
Okay. Marqueta, can you please share Jorge's slides? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, first slide, please. Okay, the EPSA, that is called the Thermal Dome of the Eastern Pacific, or the Costa Rica Thermal Dome, was discussed in the workshop that was carried out at the Galapagos Islands in August of 2012. And it was selected as a potential EPSA site because of the high productivity and aggregation of charismatic endangered species in that region. And you can see there delineated in red what was the area selected at that time as the EPSA. The square there show you where we knew was the center of the Costa Rica Thermal Dome at that time. Next one, please. And this is on a slide, so if you can go to the screen and activate the slide, please. No. Yes, with it. Yeah, right there. Thank you. Okay, this is this area is an upwelling site that has a high productivity ratio in this area, which is actually 5 to 6 times larger than the adjacent waters. And you can see that this is the concentration of chlorophyll. You can see there that it is part of different upwelling systems in the Central American Isthmus. Most of them are actually located outside the jurisdictional water. So you can see there right now the center of the Costa Rica Thermal Dome, which is mostly located outside the 200 miles limit, and therefore is in the high seas. This is not only a challenge because it shares jurisdictional waters with high seas waters, but also is a challenge because, as you can see, is a very dynamic feature that moves throughout the years and among years. Thank you. Next one. Okay, this is an upwelling system that is basically produced by the combination of currents and trade winds. And the north equatorial countercurrent, which actually arrives in the Pacific coast of Central America, is a medium-sized current which carries about 140 times the Amazon flow, some 30 million metric cubic meters per second. And as it turns north, it actually creates an upwelling that pumps water about 3.5 million cubic meters per second from deep waters about 4 to 500 meter deep that actually reach the surface of the region and carries a lot of nutrients that are basically the basis of a bloom of microalgae, in this case blue-green algae, and at the same time, this is the basis of a very complex food web. Next one, please. Through the last decade, we have improved vastly our knowledge about the Costa Rica Thermal Dome. You can see what was the area proposed in the workshop in 2012 as the EPSA of Papagayo, which is called now, and what actually is the extent of the thermal dome of Costa Rica. And the different shades of blue is actually the different persistence of the system. So the wider it is, the longer the most years during the analysis period has the dome remain in that region. So you can see the first is very dynamic, second is very extensive, and third, it was much larger than we thought at the beginning. Next one. So this is an area which we have already summarized a lot of biological information after the workshop, and this is an area that concentrates a lot of cetaceans. 10 of the 10 species that you find in the Eastern Pacific, in the tropical Eastern Pacific, are found concentrated in that region, taking advantage of the high productivity associated with the site. Of particular importance is the blue whale, as you can see in the right side of the slide. This is a large population of blue whales that migrate from the western coast of the United States towards this area yearly to reproduce, and this is a very important site for this species. Next. Also, we found out that beyond the blue whale migrations, there was a lot of migrations associated with the site, like leatherbacks that use the site during early stages of its development before they migrate south to the South Pacific, I mean, in front of Chile. Also, it concentrates a lot of the billfish and shark populations in the Eastern Pacific. Next. At the same time, it concentrates a lot of the fishing effort, especially porcine tuna fleets from many countries around the world converge in this area to capture. You can see at the upper left side where the fleet is concentrated is basically the area where the dome is center. And so this is a very important fishing ground, and of course it produces an additional layer of complexity in the future management of this area. Next. At the same time, it's an area that is transected by about 6% of the world maritime traffic, basically associated with the Panama Canal area, and therefore a lot of the traffic to the western coast of the United States and Canada and Asia are bisecting or transecting the dome. Next. So at the last decade, we have been able to improve significantly not only the amount of information and knowledge about that. We have been able to raise awareness in the region about the existence of this feature and its relevance, but also we have been attracting the attention of different partners who are supporting us for the next 5 years to basically develop, together with the Sargasso Sea, long-term study on this Costa Rica thermal dome, not only analyzing biological but also socioeconomical information, like the relationship between the high seas and the coast, and the generation of area-based management model and governance schemes for this area. So I think that the last decade has been a very productive one for this particular region. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Indeed, another very interesting example. So now we cross the Pacific over to Japan, where our colleague Mr. Yoshihisa Shirayama from the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, or JAMSTEC, will tell us about the very interesting EBSA work going on in Japan. Please, Shida-san, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see me? Yes. And can you see my screen?
Yes, you just have to make the presentation into presentation mode.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect. You just have to click that there.
So today I'd like to introduce the establishment of a new marine protected area in the deep sea in Japan based on the EBSA processes, which was just introduced by Mr. Okuda briefly. As Mr. Okuda introduced, in October 2010, the CBDH target was adopted, and 10% of the area, marine area, should be MPA until 2020. And from that, within 10 years, Japan have to make the 10% MPA. But at that time, sorry, something wrong happens. The Japan's strategy for marine biodiversity conservation was decided to show the definition of marine protected area. Then in 2016, Japanese EBSA was announced, and from that EBSA, the deep sea marine protected area was enforced by the Ministry of Environment in December 2020. And I will show you details of these processes now on. So before the IH target was decided, Japan do not have the formal definition of marine protected area. Then the marine protected area was formally announced as a marine area designed and managed by law or other effective manners in March 2011. Based on this definition, Japanese government counted how many percentage of the Japanese EEZ is marine protected area, and they found it was 88.3%. So the government found it is necessary to increase the marine protected area more than 2% until end of the 2020. So the Japanese government decided the EBSA processes for selecting them or defining or establishing a new marine protected area until end of 2020. And at first, the Japanese government decided to select the EBSA areas within Japanese EEZ. To do that, the government decided or created a study group consisting of 5 experts, and they studied 3 years for where to establish EBSAs. And by the end of 2013, selected 321 marine areas from coastal, offshore surface, and offshore seafloor of Japanese EEZ as an EBSAs. After coordination, interestingly, the number of the EBSAs within Japan is exactly the same to the number of the EBSAs in the global CBD side. Anyway, after coordination with relevant ministries and agencies, official announcement was released at the April 2016 for the 321 marine areas, just before the Shimen EBSA workshop, which was held in the summer 2016. The right side diagram is showing the offshore seafloor EBSAs in Japanese EEZ. And you can see so many EBSAs around Japan. And after that, the Japanese government need to set or select the MPAs from these EBSAs. So in 2017, an expert group to designate the MPAs on the offshore area has been set, and the report was sent to the government in the end of the fiscal year 2017. And based on that report, the amendment bill of nature conservation law was created by the Ministry of Environment Japan, and it passed the Japanese Diet in April 2019. And following that amendment of the law, the Ministry of Environment Japan took action for its enforcement, and they decided it is appropriate to zone 2 stages based on regulation intensities and to carry out proper management in each areas. The low regulation areas, the human activity is allowed, but the high regulation areas, it is strictly banned by mining as well as touching the bottom for trawling, fish trawling. And based on these enforcement, finally, a new MPAs in the deep sea bed in Japan was created. There is 4 areas, and it consists of 226 square kilometers, huge areas, as large as the Japanese Honshu, largest island, Honshu. And thanks to that, the Japanese MPA increased from 83% to 13.3%. And achieve the Aichi target 11 at the December 2020. I'd like to emphasize one thing following this amendment of the law, that Ministry of Environment funded a scientific program entitled Research and Development of Monitoring Technique for Management of the New MPA, Offshore Deep Sea Bed. Because the setting of MPA is not the end, but it is the beginning of the management or conservation of marine biodiversity in the deep sea. But to monitor the conservation, it is important to carry out monitoring of it following the less costly and effective manners. So the new technique, analyzing the images or metagenomics or eDNA analysis, is pursued to carry out more easy, less costly, and well managed way to monitor the deep sea marine biodiversity. This program has just started in 2020, and it is 3 years long-term program. So the output of this program will, I believe, help making the conservation of deep sea marine areas more effectively. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for providing us another interesting example of how the EPSA approach is valuable in many different ways. So as we can see, the EPSA work has reached nearly all corners of the globe and has had a number of tangible impacts. But we also have to remember that the EPSA criteria and the EPSA process were developed and driven by the government parties to the CBD. Many of these party delegates have been active supporters of the EPSA work, including participating in a number of the workshops, even co-chairing workshops in some cases. So now it's our pleasure to hear from some of our party friends we have with us today, and we'll begin with Mr. Mustafa Fouda, the Minister Advisor for Biodiversity and the CBD National Focal Point for Egypt. Mustafa, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and your excellent team for launching this important publications. I would like also to thank all previous interventions that made it very clear that it's not only information that you can use, but certainly how can you convince decision makers in taking decisions related to the marine environment. My journey with EPSA goes back even more than 10 years. When we first met in 2007 for an expert meeting to prepare the criteria for EPSA that was adopted later on in Berlin the following year as well. And I was lucky to co-share 2 workshops, one for the Mediterranean, where we were able to designate deep sea areas, we call it Nile Delta Fan, and another one for the Western Indian Ocean, where we designated another one for the Red Sea. This means that we were able to produce huge amount of information with the support of many experts coming not only from the region but from outside the region to help us in a way that capacity building issues were actually real in terms of experience gain and at the same time what is followed as well. Having said that, there are many issues that I would like just only to come very quickly. That during these 2 workshops, it's not only places that were designated as EPSA, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, whether some countries that they are not member of UN goals were not members, so they were cautious to present their work, although they have valuable information available, so we couldn't produce important papers. At the same time, we were able to have a database that could be used, that we have used it in either for awareness, attending meeting, or even preparing the 5th and 6th national reports on biodiversity to CBD, and even encourage some donors to fund some projects, especially small grants of UNDP and other small projects as well. Not only that, but we were able to provide information to mega projects as well in Egypt, especially related to the AIAs, or Strategic Impact Assessment as well, in a way that we help countries. Not only this, but we're able to include these EPSA sites in our updated NBSAP in a way that we are implementing what we have already agreed upon. We still have a lot for the future, especially for post-2020. At the same time, the usefulness of information in some specific issues like ecotourism as well, and we have to deal with all of the problems, because we expect more work will be done in the future, especially for the new agreement of the United Nations regarding the deep sea conservation of deep sea habitats in areas beyond the jurisdiction as well. So we have been successful, and I'm very, very glad that I was part of the whole process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. Indeed, you have, I think, a very unique perspective as somebody who's been active from the perspective of the CBD deliberations on the EPSA work, as well as actively participating in the science and multiple workshops, as you've noted, and actually translating the work in the, into domestic policy as well. So thank you. We now turn to another colleague, Ms. Sophie Mergeau, the Special Envoy for the Ocean from Belgium, who has also been an active EPSA friend, and also Belgium hosted the recent EPSA expert workshop on future modalities for the EPSA process. So please, Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. And that was still in a different world when we were still able to meet physically. And I was reading through the report, and I was getting a little bit nostalgic with reading where the EPSAs originated from, and remembering all the times that we actually met physically and were able to negotiate person to person instead of these good alternatives, but not the same. I have 4 messages, so hopefully I will not run late when I explain this to you. To you all. Well, first of all, contrary to a number of people who have heard here today, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist, not a scientist. I have a legal background, an international law background, and so especially for people like me who are really despite years of maybe being in this oceanic world, still don't have the same comprehension. A process like the EPSAs or the EPSA process is extremely important. As a policy person and somebody who doesn't have a scientific background, it's extremely important to be able to get info, and that is precisely what the EPSA process is giving us policymakers, is to have access to info that has been peer reviewed, that has been validated scientifically, but that is translated in a way that makes it comprehensible and actionable for us as well. So my second point that I wanted to make was that what we've been doing with the EPSA process and at the different COPs is describing and identifying these areas, and basically we've been doing that. All of the scientists participating have been doing that, so that others don't have to. And I think that this is quite important in a sense, because it's one of the big achievements for me of the EPSA process, is that you are able to gather in one big exercise quite a lot of information that can then afterwards be used. And so that we also, on the other hand, we also know what's out there, what's worth protecting. And I think that this is especially important in what Mustafa just actually raised in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, where we are less familiar with what is out there, and a process like the EPSA process has been able to give us an overview of what is worth protecting, what is out there. So that has been a major achievement in my perspective. Then thirdly, I wanted to underscore and to stress and highlight the role that the Secretariat, you, Joe, and your entire team and your predecessors have been playing in this process as a facilitator. I think that, I mean, I may be speaking only for myself, but being a government official, sometimes you sort of need that encouragement and that structure to be able to work towards getting information, and you have been able to provide that. So the proverbial encouragement of, okay, here you go, this is the structure that we propose that you set out, this is we are organizing, we are helping facilitating the organization of these workshops. We are doing everything that parties need, so that parties don't really need to care about any logistics, but can just nominate their scientists, get the information afterwards. And that has really been vitally important. And it's actually an inspiration, in my opinion, it's an inspiration for other secretariats, future and present. And that has been incredibly important and has been really an achievement of this very competent marine team that you have there. And additionally, I think it's even larger than just the EPSA process. The EPSA process has, in my opinion, sort of been a vehicle, if I can use it like that, to also elevate the position of ocean discussions within CBD, and elevating these discussions to a level of where they stand now in the other CBD discussions, like the post-2020 framework, where the ocean takes a considerable place, which it merits because it's 70% of our globe. So that's another achievement I really wanted to highlight. Then finally, in order not to take too long, I wanted to look a little bit at the challenges that are still ahead of us and that have been mentioned both in the report and today. For me, the two most important, or the three most important challenges are to get the modification procedure that's being discussed, to get that adopted. I'm calling it, I know it has a different formal name, which is much longer, but this modification procedure is what the EPSA process needs to remain relevant, and we really do need that. So we, as governments, as negotiators, we need to get our act together, if I can say it like that, and make sure that we do get this adopted. We have invested too much in this EPSA process, time, money, to sort of make it go to a standstill where we cannot get it updated anymore. So this is vitally important. Secondly, I would say that we should also be a little bit less ambitious, if I can say it, for ourselves. And I will explain this because you don't usually hear me say the words being less ambitious, but we shouldn't, with this modification procedure for EPSAs and this discussion, try to solve all of the law of the sea issues. And I think that that's really important. We are very much aware of the subtleties in law of the sea, the different interests and concerns, but this is not a process that should be used to solve all of the law of the sea issues. And lastly, we have to find a best way possible to use the EPSA information, in particular in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sophie. Really useful to bring us back to the global level, and also to remind us of why it's so urgent to build on the successes and to make sure that we have a process to allow this work to evolve into the future. So thank you very much. Now, to bring us to a close here, I think I will now take some time to talk a little bit about the legacy of the EPSA work so far and what this means going forward. So I think we can all agree, and I think we can all be, all of us that have contributed to this, be very proud of this unprecedented global effort more than 500 experts from over 140 countries have really contributed to near global coverage of the EBSA workshop scope. But there are geographic gaps that remain. There's gaps that you can see there in the actual scopes of the workshop, as well as areas within the scope of the workshop for which we didn't have adequate information or expertise to analyze. So still some gaps that remain there. The EBSA work has shown us the importance of reliable data, up-to-date science and information, but importantly, the combination of that data with the people that understand the information, that understand the areas and know how to interpret and apply it, and how to interpret and apply the EBSA criteria. So the combination of the data and the people was seen as absolutely essential to this work. But unfortunately, the workshop outputs reflect the data available and the expertise available at the time of the workshop. And we know even still that the workshops are, as with any kind of workshops and work in that regard, is unable to be 100% comprehensive of all relevant data. And as well, knowledge has evolved and grown over time. Indeed, also with respect to the people and the people that are engaged, we know that there's been a bit of a gap in engaging the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities. So there's a need there to better integrate that work. But while we're on the subject of people, I think a very important part of the legacy of the EBSA process is all of the people that have contributed to this work. These are just some of the photos, not even half of the photos of the EBSA workshops, with all of these contributors that have given so much time and efforts and investment into this process. All of the EBSA workshop co-chairs that have played a majorly important role in driving this process and guiding the workshops to a successful outcome. Really huge thanks goes to all of them. But also, I think a special note of thanks is really due to Ms. Jihan Lee, who, as many have said, was my predecessor here at the CBD Secretariat, and in fact drove the evolution and the growth of the EBSA process. Indeed, many call her the godmother of EBSAs. So we're very, she has since moved on to doing very important work in the International Seabed Authority, but we're grateful for her work here. And indeed, I think the EBSA legacy is also part of her legacy as well. Also, my other colleague, EBSA colleague at the CBD Secretariat, Ms. Jackie Grekin, our CBD Secretariat EBSA team has been working very hard over many years, and us here pictured as well as many other behind the scenes. So thanks to my colleagues, and indeed, I certainly can't take credit for this work, not nearly as much as Jihan can. It has also shown us the importance of science to inform planning and management. So the EBSA process has been flexible, focusing on the scientific and ecological information present, not looking at management actions, not looking at specific threats, which makes it flexible and makes it applicable to a broad range of tools and approaches, including MPAs and impact assessments. But what this also means is that further work is often needed to translate this information into specific management purposes. So there's still more work, not only that needs to be filled in terms of the EBSA process and the EBSAs themselves and where the EBSA has been described, but also in translating that work into fit for purpose information. So when we look to the horizon, we know that we are facing a lot of rapid changes. Things are changing very rapidly, both in terms of the rapid environmental and human-driven changes in the ocean, as well as developments in other global processes. We have increasing knowledge and new methodological approaches emerging. Other EBSA-like processes are emerging at different scales, and indeed, we will have increased ambitions set by the post-2020 framework. So what that tells us is that the EBSA work is not done. We need to fill gaps in the EBSA process and the EBSA descriptions themselves. We need to keep the descriptions up to date, and we need to figure out how to incorporate work under other processes. And for all of these reasons, and the reasons that Sophie signaled very directly, the parties have before them at the Conference of the Parties next year a very important decisions to make about the future of the EBSA process. We don't want all of these investments and efforts to go to waste. We want the EBSA work to grow, to evolve, and to be able to inform other processes like the future BBNJ agreement coming into fruition. So it's really important that the COP15 makes a clear, definitive decision on the EBSA process and has a way for us to move forward. So again, a special thanks to the Japan Biodiversity Fund and the many other donors that have contributed to this work, the hosts of the workshops, our data teams, and from CSIRO Australia and Duke, Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative, the EBSA workshop co-chairs and participants, the many organizations that have contributed their information, the many data providers. There's so many people to thank and so many people to acknowledge, many people who have been engaged in this work longer than I have, and for who have a huge responsibility and accolades for all of these contributions. So I apologize. I know we've gone a bit over time. As you can see, we're all very excited about this work, something we've all invested a lot of time and effort into. But I think maybe we can, if we have any questions that have been posted here, maybe I can, I see we're about 15 minutes behind, so maybe we'll just take one question. So I can ask my colleague, Jackie, if you can perhaps list out a question that has been posed, and we can perhaps pose it to some of the panelists. Jackie?
Sorry, Joe. Looking how to unmute myself. I see one question asking where you see the EBSA process going. What is your ideal scenario for the future?
Well, I think that sounds, maybe we can pose that to some of our panelists. Are there any panelists here that wish to take the floor? You can simply turn on your screen and your camera and microphone. I think this could be a great. Mustafa, I see your microphone on. Would you like to?
Certainly, you put it very rightly. We know now where are we now and where are we heading, what kind of challenges that is in front of us. Certainly the best important scenario is to get involved EBSA in post-2020 in a way that we can implement the remaining issues, whether gaps or updating the information or to convince decision makers. For me, I think one of the most important things that we need to think about is the awareness, how to disseminate such information in a language that can be understood not only by scientists but by everybody in a way that they appreciate the work and at the same time encourage decision makers to continue this kind of good work. This is the way how I see it. Thank you very much.
Indeed, very astute observation, Mustafa. Thank you. And I think you know very well, in fact, better than others, both sides of the EBSA story, both the global side from the CBD perspective and the actual science, and on the ground side, actually 3 sides of the EBSA process. So I think your observations there, and you're quite right that we have to build on this, allow it to adapt with the changing marine environment and the changing global policy environment to be able to move forward. So with that, I think we can close here. As the participants have all seen, we've posted the link to the report in the chat. We will also be posting, sending to all registered participants the link as well, so you have it. You can have it in your email. And we will be posting the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel, on the CBD YouTube channel. So in addition, I should also remind everyone that we are doing the same effort for the Sustainable Ocean Initiative. I think many of us here have also participated in the great work under SOE. There's been a lot of alignments between EBSA and SOE. SOE was also born at around the same time as the EBSA process, so we will soon have a SOE impact report coming out as well. And just to say thanks to everyone who's been involved in the EBSA process and driven this work, been involved at many different scales, from the CBD COP discussions, the workshop discussions, translating this onto the ground, bringing it into other processes. But the work is not done. This is the next, this is the end of the first phase, that some may say, and hopefully the beginning of the second phase. So we look forward to expanding the EBSA community, evolving and growing the EBSA work, and we welcome you all to be a part of it. So with that, we'll close, and we look forward to being in touch soon. And I can say goodbye on behalf of the CBD Secretariat team. And thank you for joining.
Goodbye. Yes.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.